All right. Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about Japanese Maples 101. So this is going to be a great webinar that hopefully you'll get a lot of information about how to select or choose or think about different varieties of Japanese maples, but also how to take care of them. I think that's one of the most important things, and one of my favorite things to do is prune Japanese maples. They love to be pruned and shaped. I mean, look at this image over here of this gorgeous Japanese maple, and to get that habit and that structure, that's what I think a lot of people want and envision, and we can get you there. Japanese maples are slow growing, but because they're slow growing, they can really increase your land value. And so using them in your landscape is a great thing to do. Maybe you've purchased a home that has a Japanese maple and you want to know how to take care of it. Maybe you aren't going to be in your home for a long time and maybe you want to grow one in a container. That's what we're going to talk about as well. So there's lots and lots of uses for Japanese maples. They're so diverse in the collection. I mean, there's collectors out there that collect them. Some people might have one, some people might have 10 to 15 to 20. So it really just depends on you as what you want to do with them, because they are so versatile and diverse, which is why I love them. The shape, the habit, the uniqueness, it just makes them one of my favorite trees to use in a landscape, to use in containers, and it's just a really, really fun tree to work with and enjoy for many, many, many years. So it's just an awesome, awesome plant. We are going to kind of talk about all the different things that you can kind of envision in Japanese maples, how you can shape them and prune them over the years. We're going to talk about how to feed them, how you water them initially, whether you're planting initially or you're growing over time in a container. We'll talk about location, where you're going to plant them. And of course, we'll talk about all the different types. One of my favorite things about Japanese maples is, of course, the versatility. And you can see that here in the picture. You can grow them in containers. You can grow them almost as a shade tree. I mean, most people think of a shade tree, in the horticultural world as something that's usually about 40 to 50 feet tall. Well, no Japanese maple is really going to get that big, but there are some varieties that can get up to that 20 to 30 foot height. Now, it does take time, which is why they're so valuable. And so that's what's so cool too, is when you have an old Japanese maple that could be 10, 15, 20, 30 years old, then the value of that tree is very, very immense to that landscape. Now, I mean, you could try and sell a Japanese maple. I mean, we've had some big ones here, and I've seen prices go as high as $10,000 to $15,000 for a Japanese maple. But what it does for the land value of your home is it increases your landscape value. It adds that longevity and that look of establishment to your landscape. And that's why I love them so much. So whether you're starting from a small one and you're going to grow it over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, or you want to get a bigger one, we can help you out. So there's lots and lots of different options there, and we'll talk about those. Another reason that I love Japanese maples is the 4-season interest. There's not many plants really that have a complete year-round interest level. That really keeps you intrigued and keeps you excited to see the next phase. And so I just kind of want to run through those real quick so you know them. The spring season, of course, is one of my favorite times to enjoy a Japanese maple. That color when it first comes out is very intense. It's gorgeous. You get a lot of different types of colors. The leaves kind of slowly come out. You might even get a couple blooms here and there. Maybe there's little whirly birds that come on them, but they're not messy. They're not a bad tree, because most of them are going to range anywhere from 3 feet high to 20 feet high. And so you've got a huge diversity obviously in height, but nothing that's going to be too overpowering or too big. But that spring color is absolutely gorgeous, and you just it says, hey, spring is here. It's one of the earlier trees to actually leaf out, which makes it really fun too. So you kind of can say, hey, my forsythia is blooming, the daffodils are coming out of the ground, and my Japanese maple is leafing out. And so it's just a really fun time to see those, and you get this really, really cool color out of them. Also, in the summer, that color kind of settles in. And so I'm gonna show you some variegated type of varieties that when you see that color, it really settles in. I love the summer interest of a Japanese maple. Plus, that's when they're really actively growing. That's when you're gonna get a fair amount of shoots, you're gonna develop root systems, and you can do a little bit of selective pruning. We'll talk about that as well. But summer interest is definitely high, especially when we start to get a canopy built on some of our Japanese maples so that we can enjoy the shade from underneath them. Or maybe we are going to add something to the maple, and that's usually what we do in the summers. Maybe we'll build a little fountain underneath, or we can put some statuary, or we can do a little bit of pruning. And then of course you get those bursts of color when you get that new growth. So summer is just awesome. Fall, super, super intense color. I mean, that is when they shine, I think. The fall season, as those leaves color, I mean, Japanese maples and maples of all really put on their show in the fall. And so it's a great time to see those amazing colors in the fall season. And of course, in this image right here, you can see all those leaves have fallen, not all of them, but a majority of the leaves have fallen on the ground, and it almost creates this red kind of sea or red lake underneath your Japanese maple. And it could be orange, it could be yellow, it could be a multiple of different colors. It could be all of those colors throughout the entire fall season. So that's what's so cool about Japanese maples in the fall season, is that color change. And then of course, the winter interest, probably one of my favorites really, is that habit. And you can see that up there in that top picture. Just how cool and unique these trees are. Not one is alike. They're all different. They're all unique. And it's just absolutely stunning to see that habit and see that structure and the contortion sometimes on some of our weeping Japanese maples, but even our upright maples. The bark color can be different. Sometimes you get these trees that have like a coral colored bark, and I'll show you a couple examples of those as well. So really, really cool interest. 4 seasons, you can't beat them. The land value, the increase to your land value to your landscape is just immense, and they're just so much fun to grow and to train and to do different things. And that's what I'm going to teach you here today, is all of those different things. So here's the tricky part. Types of Japanese maples, or varieties, or cultivars, or genuses. You know, I won't get too specific here. This is 101. Not to mention, I don't know that I could get too specific for you. But what I will tell you is Acer, because you might see that name used a lot, especially if you're looking at labels or tags. Acer is maple. So then in that category of maple, of course, there's like Acer rubrum. Acer rubrum would be like your red maples that you see, the big, huge October glories, or red sunset maples, the big ones that are our shade trees that might even naturally grow in this area. There's a lot of different types of Acers that grow naturally in the Hampton Roads area and across the country. So Acer is just the genus, and it's a big, big, huge group of plants. Now, in the Japanese maples, you're going to find 2 major categories there, or subcategories, and it's Acer Palmatum, or Palmatum. It's Palmatum, and that is what I like to call, and keep it simple and not use Latin as much as I possibly can, I like to call that a broadleaf maple, and that's what you're seeing here. So broadleaf maples have, a typical maple leaf shape. So you're going to have some deep lobes, but it's going to be a fairly full leaf, and typically broadleaf maples are going to grow upright. So you see that far picture over there? That's what a Japanese maple, an Acer Palmatum, is going to grow like. It's going to grow upright. Now, they can grow as small as 2 or 3 feet, but they can grow as big as 20 to 25 feet. So you got a huge range of sizes in just that one subcategory. Is that Acer Palmatum, that broadleaf maple, is gonna give you a wide diversity, but a different look. And typically, it's gonna be upright. Now, the next one is going to be, actually, let me show you a couple of those, just because I've got a chance here to kind of show you a couple different broadleaf maples and bring them real close. So let's see. I see a question there. Are you still selling the tiny quart Japanese maples? No, we don't get those little tiny ones anymore, because they've become so popular that really the biggest size, or the smallest size we can get, is this 1 gallon size. So let me show you some of those broadleaf maples. And broadleaf is what I'm going to use just to keep the kind of Latin down to a minimum. But this is what you would typically see in a broadleaf maple, right? You would see this nice broadleaf, very, very standard kind of Japanese maple leaf, and it's going to grow upright. So this is your red leaf, and here's the cool thing. In a broadleaf maple, you're going to get a red or a green, and so you've got a lot of options in there. So let's stay in kind of the red category here, and let me show you this little guy. So this is kind of similar to a Shana. I think this one is called Haim Shoujo. So this is a really cool one. So this would be classified in that broadleaf, because you can see right there, it's got that nice broad leaf. But this one's a bushier variety. It's not going to get very big. Let's read the label. Let's read the label here real quick before I tell you how big it's going to get. Let's see, about 4 to 5 feet high and wide. So not very big. compared to something like this one that I showed you earlier, and that one is called, let me just get this, Black Hole. So this Black Hole is going to get somewhere around the 10 to 15 foot range, and this one's only going to get about 3 to 5 feet, and we can train them and we can do different things with them. I'll get into that here in a little bit. So really, really cool, different style of that red leaf broadleaf maple, and they grow in different sizes. They also grow in some of the thinner leaves. So this would actually be kind of very dissected. It's still in that Acer Palmatum. Really cool one, kind of very, very thread-leafed, very different looking because you can kind of see that very lacy habit. So really, really nice one there. And then of course there's green leaf ones. So let me show you this one. Now this is, well, let's see if I can find a standard kind of green leaf Japanese maple. Here we go. I've got a few around me. So here would be just kind of your standard green leaf broadleaf maple. So this is going to grow upright, very standard shape and size, probably get somewhere around 15 to 20 feet tall. And it's just a really, really nice, simple example. I love these green leaves. Really, really pretty. And that green is very popular these days and really stands out in the landscape. So we've got that. Now we've also got, in the green leaf variety, some that stay in that kind of chartreuse color. So here we go. So you can see, look at that. I mean, just that really cool broadleaf, really different look. Let's see if I can get that real close to the camera there. Blur me out. And so you can just see how different that leaf is. And as you will hear me probably say a few times, there are so many different varieties. This one only gets about, I think it's about 7 to 8 feet tall. So a little bit of a smaller one, so kind of in that mid-range. So when we talk about varieties, there's somewhere around probably over 10,000 different varieties of Japanese maples. No, I don't know them all, but there's so many different varieties to choose from, and you can see just here in this room I've got about 15 to 20 different varieties, and there's such a diversity there in size and shape and habit. So in that green leaf, that green broadleaf Japanese maple, there's even a thinner leafed one as well. So you can see almost that kind of bamboo kind of cool look. So really, really nice. Lots and lots of choices. Now, there are some that even blur the lines a little bit. So here's a great example of one that kind of crosses over. Well, actually, I'll get to that here in a minute. Let me explain the next variety. Let me talk about the different type of Japanese maple that keeps us kind of in this broad category. Now, I will say there are 17 different types of categories that Japanese maples can actually fall under. I'm not going to go into all of them. It would take an entire webinar, and that's too detailed for a 101, and you don't really need to know all of them. I usually just classify them as a broadleaf Japanese maple or a lace leaf Japanese maple, and that's what these are. So lace leaf Japanese maples are Acer dissectum. Now, again, I won't use the Latin much anymore, but Acer dissectum or a lace leaf Japanese maple. Thread leaf might be used sometimes, but a lace leaf Japanese maple is typically going to be weeping in habit. So it's typically going to trail, and that's a very, very popular variety and a very, very popular kind of subcategory is that lace leaf Japanese maples because they're usually smaller, they're great for containers, they add a different look to your landscape, and you're gonna see lots and lots of images today of some of these old established lace leaf maples that just really have an amazing show in the winter when you can see the habit and all the different looks. So they're really, really cool, and you're gonna find them in green or red as well, and sometimes even some multiple colors in there, but usually green or red. You're also going to see different habits as well. So some that can get somewhere between 12 to 15 feet high and even wide, but some that get no bigger than 3 by 3. So you got a huge subcategories there, or diversity there as well. And you can do a lot of different things with them, which is one of my favorite things about the weeping Japanese maples is you can train them and do a lot of different things with them, which I'll show you here in a little bit. But let me show you some of those varieties. Here's a great one right here. This one's called Green Gem. So this is kind of a bigger one, but you can see that lace leaf. So you can see how that leaf really is very, very lacy. And then you can see that weeping habit. All the branches are kind of coming down and trailing over. So really, really nice one. And those come in in red varieties as well. I will tell you, red varieties are very, very hard to come by right now. So really kind of tricky to kind of show you a red lace leaf maple because we are very, very low in quantities. We do have some, and we've got some bigger ones that I couldn't quite cart in here. But they do make, of course, there are red lace leaf varieties. The green lace leaf are absolutely stunning though. Absolutely love them. In the lace leaf category as well, let's see if I had another one, I think, that was a great example of really showing that diversity here. So this is a cool one because this is a lace leaf maple. So you can see it's got that exact same maple, that exact same leaf, but it's upright growing. So this one's actually going to grow upright. This is one of my favorite varieties called Cereu. So Cereu is an upright grower. It gets about 10 to 15 feet tall, maybe taller. I've seen them bigger, but it's got that lace leaf habit. So it's a very fine kind of thread leaf, but it grows upright. And this is where we start to blur the lines a little bit. Over time, you'll start to see all of these different varieties can do so many different things and have so many different habits. Remember, I was talking about broadleaf maples, and I was about to show you one. Here it is. So here's a broadleaf maple, and you can see that trailing habit. Now this is called Ryusi. Ryusi is a really, really popular one, and this is what I would call a heavy weeping Japanese maple. This one's gonna definitely weep very, very hard, very, very fast, and you can see it just literally wants to just kind of bend right over and go straight down. This was not forced to do this. This is how it was grown. Now in the ground, this is going to grow a little bit more just kind of on the ground and just continue to run out. But because of this, you can grow it in a container and let it really trail down. I mean, you can put this container way up high. You could actually hang it if you wanted to and make it a hanging basket. But really, really cool variety, and you can do a lot of different things with it, and we can really train it and do some different things. Maybe I'll get into kind of pruning this one here in a little bit to kind of show you what you can do with it. But that's what I'm talking about when I talk about varieties, or when I like to break them into the two kind of major categories of a lace leaf or a broadleaf. Lace leaves are typically going to weep and usually be very, very slow growing. Broadleaves can be faster growing but can be slow growing and are typically going to grow upright. But there are some varieties that blur the line for sure. And I mentioned the green or the variegated. Here's a great example. Let's see if you can see this. So you can see that variegation in this leaf, and there's a little bit of white. You can see the veins. So really cool. Let me see if I can get a little better. There's a good image. So there you can see that white shining through, and the veins are staying really, really green. So that would be a variegated leaf. So really, really cool way of showing that the diversity in Japanese maples. Let me also grab this one back here, because I talk about variegation a lot in leaves, and check this one out. So this one's got this really cool pink variegation in it. You can see where the white edge actually turns pink, and so you get this really cool pink variegation. This one's called Beni Shihinge. So Shihinge, yeah. So really, really cool variety there. And there's lots and lots of different types of variegations. I mean, you'll see some that look like they've been dipped in blood. I think that one was called Benny Heim. And so it looks like it's a green leaf and it's got red edges. Lots and lots of different varieties there. And remember I mentioned that bark color earlier? So this one is called Wildfire. And you can see that bark in there. You see how it's all coral colored bark inside? So really, really cool. So when this one loses its leaves in the fall, then you get this really gorgeous kind of pink, wildfire looking kind of stem onto it. And then it's just a green broadleaf maple, so it's a very simple maple. And these actually turn bright yellow in the fall, and then all that pink bark starts to show through. It's a really, really cool variety. And those typically get about 12 to 15 feet high as well. So lots and lots of different things that you can see in all of these different. So really, I think the most important thing to take from types or varieties or genus is keep it simple, I think is the best thing. And know that there's so many different types that probably no one person knows them all. There's over, I think, 10,000 different varieties now. So when I say type, I mean variety. So many different types of varieties. And then really in that kind of broader category is the lace leaf and the broadleaf. That kind of really kind of gets you into two major categories of Japanese maples. Now there's actually 17 of them, but I like to keep it simple and say it's a broadleaf or a lace leaf. And lace leaves are going to typically weep, but not all the time. Broadleafs are going to typically grow upright, but not all the time. So really, really cool, and that's what's so cool about Japanese maples is you'll never know them all, and you'll never collect them all. You'll probably never see them all, but because of that, you get so much diversity, and you're able to use them in so many different places around your yard and in your landscape. Now, where do you grow them in your yard or in your landscape? So let's talk about sun and shade real quick. This is what's cool about Japanese maples, is you can really grow them in any location. I typically say, generally speaking, to keep it simple, is Japanese maples are going to prefer a little bit of shade. So where do they grow? Let's talk about where they grow naturally is, of course, in the mountains of Japan. So you're seeing this as an understory tree typically. In the forest, in the woodlands, in the mountains of Japan, even a little bit in China and a couple different places, even up into Russia. So you're going to see a lot of this diversity, but typically they're growing in a wooded, mountainous climate. And so what that means is they can take it very cold, so you don't have to worry about cold temperatures typically, especially not in our roads. I mean, Japanese maples I think grow pretty much anywhere in the United States. I don't think you have to even worry about heat too much. But Japanese maples are very diverse in where you can plant them. And then sun versus shade, that's why I typically say grow them in a little bit of shade. Now, if you want intense color and you really want a better looking kind of color out of your Japanese maple, then what you're gonna get, and so there's Susan said fried in SoCal. So could probably in Southern California, you might stay too warm, maybe down into the lower parts of Florida as well. But you might try them in shade. They might grow a little bit better in the shade. So in the sun, you're gonna get a little bit more intense color, and the color is gonna be a little bit better. And a lot of people see this when they have a red lace leaf Japanese maple. If you pick up the branches that are shading the other branches, you're gonna see green underneath there. And so you're gonna see that great color, and that's why they typically leaf out a little bit earlier, you're gonna get that more intense color, and that's really cool. But in full sun, you're gonna get the color. In shade, you're gonna have a little less burn. And that's why I pulled this image right here next to me. Let's see if I can see it right there. That yellow leaf, that yellow dissected leaf, that's a weeping lace leaf maple, and you can see those brown tips on it. And that's pretty natural, so that's actually something you're gonna see pretty commonly no matter where you grow it, especially early in age. As they get older, in the shade, you typically won't see that. In the sun, you might see it every year, or at least every year that we have a warm, hot summer that maybe sees some drought time periods as well. So just keep that in mind. You can grow them in both locations. I pulled that image of the one up there, that big red one, and you can just see that red intense color, and it's growing out in full blazing sun. And then of course that big Japanese maple, that old kind of dissected weeping lace leaf Japanese maple, and you can see moss growing on it and all the moss over the ground, so you can see they can grow in pretty deep shade as well. So that's obviously in a wooded setting, woodland setting that's very, very shaded. It probably gets dapple light at most. And so because of that, you're going to get moss growing on it, but because they're long-lived old trees, they can withstand that, and that's what they love actually. They love being in those woodland settings. And so it's important to know that you can grow both either in sun or shade, and that's great. I typically say if you're going to go in full sun with one, try and choose a broadleaf variety. Let's say you wanted a weeping, lace leaf red Japanese maple. Well, what you could do is pick one of the dwarf, smaller versions of a broadleaf maple that grow a little bit bushy that can actually, because of that bigger leaf, withstand the heat a little bit. That very fine lace leaf really struggles a little bit in our full sun, especially in the Hampton Roads area. Depends again on where you live, and depends again on what you want. If you want to have it, you can do it. Just might take a little bit more maintenance, and we'll talk about that as well. Talking about location, sun versus shade, you can also grow them in lots and lots of different types of environments around your home. And that's why I love it, is that diversity. I'm going to say it a lot. Diversity is extremely important when we're looking for plants around our yard. It's hard when you've got a love or a passion for a specific plant and you don't have a space specifically for it because it requires something specific. With the Japanese maple, it's pretty easy to use in all of your different locations. I love growing them in containers. So you see the picture up here. Growing them in containers is very easy to do. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as we go along, but Japanese maples can be grown in containers for very, very long periods of time because they are so slow growing. They're actually going to get slower in a container. But container growing is great. You can bring them onto your porch or patio. You can use them out in the landscape in a container. You can use them almost as a specimen. I love them as a specimen, so that's kind of what that picture is of that red lace leaf maple over there by the front door. that is a eye catcher. It's a conversation piece. You know, it's in the front of somebody's home, and that means that when somebody walks up to the front door, they might say, what is this gorgeous tree right here? And so specimens, of course, they're great as specimens. And then, of course, you can use them almost as a small shade tree, as this one over here shows you. You know, that great unique habit, kind of almost looks like a dogwood or a cherry tree out there. But Japanese maples can take full sun. You can see it right there taking it. That's that broadleaf upright growing of a Japanese maple. And you can actually go and probably put a little bench under there, or your kids can climb it. I mean, I've got a Japanese maple in the front yard. My kids love it. It's the only climbing tree we have. So they're great, strong trees. They can provide a little bit of shade, and they're just great specimens, but use them in all the different ways. You'll have so much fun enjoying them in every location around your landscape. So you can use them in so many different ways. It's an awesome way to do it. All right, so let's talk about planting them. So let's talk first about planting them in the ground. So whenever we recommend planting here in the Hampton Roads area, you're typically going to be dealing with a clay soil typically. And so in a clay-based soil, we always want to amend with compost and perlite. Compost is going to add nutrients, it's going to loosen up your soil, and it's going to be a great kind of way to get your root system established and started. Perlite is those little white styrofoamy things that you see in potting soil. You can buy that separately, so compost, perlite, and then of course your soil. The plant's going to live in your soil, so you got to keep that soil around it. So we always recommend a third of your soil, a third of compost, a third of perlite, and that's an easy way of doing it. Now, if we're going to be in a bit of a sandy area, because I know we get a little coastal here, obviously, and when you get closer to the beaches, you might have a little bit of a sandier soil. And then you would switch from the perlite to maybe just compost, or add a little bit of peat moss. Peat moss is going to thicken up your soil a little bit and add some water holding capacity. Sand is like volleyballs in a big bin. You know, lots of big pockets of holes and air for water to work through and drain very quickly, and nutrients as well. It's great because it allows a lot of air in. Clay is like golf balls in a big bin. Hard to get your hand in, not a lot of holes, not a lot of openings, so it can stay wet. It also can dry out and be as hard as a rock, so we're trying to open that up. Allow airflow, allow nutrients, and allow water to percolate through the soil, and that's what the compost and perlite do. So planting, easy. Now, remember when I mentioned that they grow in the mountains of Japan? So whenever we plant rhododendrons, azaleas, things that grow in our mountains, we know that they like to be up on a little bit of a hill. And what that means is when you plant a Japanese maple, to definitely plant it a little high. And so what I mean by that is, I'll just grab this one as a little quick example. So when I say to plant something a little bit high on its own little mountain, its own little hill, is when you take it out of the container, and you go to plant it, loosen up the root ball a little bit. You don't need to slice it up. You don't need to take a knife or anything like that. Just kind of gently loosen it up so those roots know it's in a new home. But when you go to plant it, don't put it all the way back down in the soil and fill it up and put soil on top. So, and I'll explain that here in a second. Why not to do that? Mainly because there's a bunch of small roots on the top surface and they don't want to be under the ground. They're used to being on top of the surface, and that's where they want to be. And you can smother it. Plus, adding soil to what's supposed to be exposed and above the ground around this trunk is not good either. But Japanese maples like to be able to drain very well. And so what that means is to plant it a little high. And so when you water it, that top surface can get its water, but it can drain very well. So just like in the mountains. In the mountains, rainfall would hit and the mountains would drain all the water down to the bottom, into the valleys, into the rivers, and the streams. And so you want to kind of create that same environment with your Japanese maple. So when you plant it, I always recommend planting about 1 to 2 inches high out of the ground. So you got this lip right here. So imagine this is your level of your soil. That's where you would want to plant it, is just like that. And then take a little excess soil and just bring it right to the side. Not the top, just right to the side. And that creates this little tiny hill effect. And so that top system, that top root system isn't going to get drowned out. So we really want to keep that kind of going. Now, I mentioned don't put mulch or soil or anything up around the trunk. We definitely don't want to do that, and mainly because no tree really likes that, but also because most Japanese maples are going to be grafted these days. So you're going to see that right here. I'll pull this one actually. This one's a little bit of a better example. So let's see if it'll focus in on that. See how it looks different down here at the bottom? It's kind of got this weird kind of looking little knot thing here. that is completely normal, and a lot of people want to put that underneath the ground and say, well, that needs to be under the ground, right? So they put soil up to here, and that'll actually kill the maple over time. And it might not be a quick death. It can happen, it's going to try and fight that. It's going to try and send roots out, but a lot of times it's not going to happen, and it's going to basically rot out your tree. And that's because it's grafted. And so grafting is a technique used very, very frequently with Japanese maples, because what they do is they take a rootstock of a wild maple, or let's say you have a red maple that's growing in your yard, and maybe you get those little whirly birds that come down, and maybe you get little Japanese maples popping up in your yard. Well, a lot of people will actually grow from seed from Japanese maples, and it's usually just a wild maple or a unnamed variety of a very strong kind of basic Japanese maple rootstock. And so they're going to call it a rootstock. They're going to take those rootstocks, they're going to grow them. It's not a desirable maple on the top. It's not a variety. It's not a name variety. It's not something that maybe you could sell because somebody's looking for a specific characteristic or growth habit. But that rootstock is a very, very strong, aggressive root system. And that's a good thing because it's going to kind of ward off disease. It's going to be a strong, good root system. It's going to be a healthy root system because it's a wild maple. That's why it's wild, is because it's developed this great root system. So they're going to take that rootstock and they're going to basically cut it and splice in a desirable root. And so what they're going to do, and I'm not going to go into super detailed there, but basically they're going to take the cutting from a host plant, from the parent plant, and say, okay, I want to grow this variety, so I'm going to take a little cut from here, and then I'm going to splice it onto the rootstock of this wild maple. And then I get my desirable maple. Now what that means though is typically, and this happens a lot with like fruit trees, if you go try and plant a Granny Smith apple seed, you're most likely not going to get a Granny Smith apple tree, because that seed is somewhat supported, obviously, by the root system of that tree, and that root system is a wild tree, and so you're going to get a wild apple tree. Just like a Japanese maple, if you get a seed or a flower that turns into a seed on your Japanese maple, it's probably going to grow just a basic green or a basic red, and that's because your tree's grafted. But trust me, trying to get a wild grown name variety Japanese maple is very, very rare, and it's very slow, and it's going to be very expensive. So grafting maples is a much faster way of producing a desirable maple for us to purchase and plant in our yard, and you can get a lot of these different varieties. So that's what grafting is. Kind of went a little bit long on that, but it's important to know because we don't want to cover that up and we don't want to harm that. And if you see it there and you think it maybe looks a little gnarly, trust me, in a few years you probably really won't even notice it. I also bring up the Graft Point because I got one other thing to show you, and I did grab one that has this. If you ever get something growing below the graft, so you can see this is that variegated kind of zebra looking maple. This is called the Phantom Flame. But you can see down here at the bottom, there's some green growing out of the bottom. And you might be like, oh cool, I got a new branch. Well, the problem with that is, and sometimes new leaves will come out green, but you can see up here, let's see if we can find this little tip right here of this branch. You can see right here on that tip, it's not super variegated, but it definitely has some red tinge to it. And then you look at this one, and it looks like just a basic green. It doesn't really have a lot of that same color. Now, if I look real close, I can see this leaf, or this branch right here, is coming out of the desirable maple. Now, most likely I'm not going to want that, but this one down here is definitely coming below the graft point. And when you get something growing below the graft, then it's your wild maple. And what that means is it can take over your desirable maple. So always clip those off when they're kind of growing below that graft point, because a lot of times you'll see it on a weeping Japanese maple. You'll have this weeping kind of lace leaf Japanese maple, and then you'll have this great, like big, huge telephone pole shoot out through the top of that maple, and that's because it's growing below the graft point. So it's important to take those off, and I'll take those off at the pruning section so I can show you how to do that. All right, so planting tips for pots is a little bit different. So if we're gonna grow one in a container, I grew my very first, when I started here at McDonald Garden Center, it was the first plant I ever bought. It was actually this exact Japanese maple. I'll show you here in full screen because I love to tell this story. But this is a Shishi Gashira Japanese maple. I just fell in love with it. I thought it was so cool, kind of bonsai, very bushy kind of habit all over the branches, really different looking. And this is called Shishi Gashira, plus I love that name, it's just a fun name to say. So this was the first plant I ever purchased here, 19 years ago, so still have it today. So awesome plant. I grew it in a container for about 15 years. So when you get a slow growing Japanese maple and you plant something in a container, it's gonna grow even slower. So that's the good thing. It's also sometimes a bad thing. If you want it to grow a little bit faster, you probably need to get it in the ground. But you can grow all of these in a container for a very long time. It's going to dwarf it, so it's going to keep it a little bit smaller for you, which is nice when you're growing something in a container, that it grows a little bit slower. It doesn't get 20, 25 feet tall on you. That wouldn't work out very well. But growing them in containers is very, very easy, and it's a lot of fun. It does require a little bit more on the feeding and the watering, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. But they're easy to do, and you can move them around. And if you're not quite sure if you're staying there for a long time, like maybe you want a little bit of a tree on your porch or patio and you live in a condo, great option, Japanese maple. Maybe you're not sure if you're gonna live in that home for a while, like I was for my first home. So I was like, I'm not gonna live here, this is my first plant, it's my baby, I wanna take it with me wherever I go. And so I grew it in a container for many, many years. And I did plant it recently, about 4 years ago, in my landscape. And I absolutely love it. It is about 8 feet tall now. It's absolutely stunning. It's full. It's got this huge, nice kind of big fan on it. It's really, really cool. And so it's something that, of course, I can remember, and it's got a great story to it. And that's what's so cool about these Japanese maples. But growing them in containers, the most important thing, of course, is use potting soil. So whenever we grow anything in a pot, make sure it's got drainage holes, and make sure we're using a good professional potting soil. Now, how big can you go? You can actually stage up fairly big, whereas like an indoor plant, I might say gradually stage up because we're gonna grow it indoors at some point. But Japanese maples, you're gonna keep outside year round. You don't wanna bring them inside. You don't need to. I mean, unless you were like way up in like Canada or something where it was gonna be extremely cold and you need to bring it in into your garage or something. But here in the Hampton Roads area and here across most of the United States, you can grow this right in a regular container, right outside with potting soil, and you're gonna be completely fine. So it could be terracotta, it could be plastic, it could be ceramic. Ceramic's gonna definitely give you the most longevity as far as look and strength and weight to keep it down. So you see that picture over there of that big kind of upright Japanese maple, that red maple, and that big nice kind of ceramic container. That is gonna be a stoneware type of container. That is gonna be giving it the weight to kind of withstand any kind of winds. They can still blow over. Mine blew over a lot over the years. But typically I grew it in the landscape, so when it did fall over, it fell into mulch or into a bed, and it wasn't too big of a deal. Every once in a while I'd get a little broken branch. I did have the deer come and actually kind of during rut and kind of rub up in there and kind of scarred it up a little bit. But hey, it survived. They're strong, strong trees. They're very durable trees. So most important thing is to use a potting soil and make sure it's got a drainage hole, and then you can grow it in a container for a long time. And over the years, if you're gonna do it for many, many years, as I did it for 15 years, you were probably going to have to upgrade your pot every so often. So probably about every 2 or 3 years, you need to look at your root system, make sure it's not completely compacted. And once you get really, really a lot of roots, you're gonna put a lot more pressure on yourself to water and feed. So you might as well go up in a size and container and use a little bit more potting soil to give it more room to grow. So let's talk about watering real quick. This is an important one. When we plant a Japanese maple in the ground, you can see that far picture over there of that hose just running water out. That is one of my best ways to tell you how to water a Japanese maple or any tree or shrub in the ground. What I always want to recommend is water deep and less often. So it's an important kind of strategy to understand that when we water plants, we want to water deep and less often. If we stand there with a hose and just water it real quick every day, and then all of a sudden we say, oh, it's good, right? It can take it. And then I stop watering it for a week, it's probably gonna die because it's used to getting that little bit of water every day. And then all of a sudden you cut it off. So definitely the best way to do it is to water deep less often. And I like to take a hose and let the water run out, not super gushing, like that's probably running a little bit too hard. I like it to not be at a trickle and not to be gushing, kind of in between, so that it's going out and it's soaking in. And so you kind of want to get that nice soaking habit. And so for a larger tree, it might be as much as 30 minutes. If you're picking out a Japanese maple here, definitely ask us what the watering requirements are. But you want to water deep less often. And so that means every 2 to 3 days, we're going to water for the first 2 to 3 weeks. If you're doing it correctly and you're watering deep, what happens is as that soil dries out, the root system is actually going to search for water, and we're going to force it to look for water. If I give it water every day, why would the root system go anywhere? So kind of think about it that way. Kind of push it a little bit, not stress, but let's just push it a little bit to find its own water source, because that's going to develop a root system a little bit faster. So that's an important way to water. Also, if you're growing in a container, you're going to water a little bit more. So containers, of course, are going to need to be watered a little bit more, and everything that we grow here is in a container. And every hose here at the garden center has one of these guys on it, a Dram watering one. Every time I talk about watering, I talk about this, because if you don't have this tool, it's the #1 tool that you got to have. So it's really, really great one. It's got an on and off valve, and it's real easy because it's going to save your back a lot of stress. But the most important thing is this breaker right here. And what that does is it breaks the water, hence the name, and it actually is going to make this nice rain kind of fall feel. So when you water your containers, it doesn't splash the soil. Even when you water in the soil, it's very, very easy. In fact, that hose method where I say just drop the hose, I usually just drop this. I can set it, with my valve, so I can set it, full blast, or I can set it, a little bit lighter, and then I can really just give it a good soaking, or I could just take this off. So I put this on my hose and I never take it off. Never, ever, ever, because it's super versatile and I love it, and it's going to save your back. So get one of these. If you're growing anything, you should probably have a Dram watering one on the end of your hose, because here at the garden center we've got one everywhere. And I say if people that water every single day are using a specific tool, you probably should be using it too. So in a container, we're going to water a little bit more. In this cooler weather that you have in like the early springs, the later falls, all the way through the winters, we might water as little as once a week, maybe even less. Especially in the winter, you might not even water it much at all, because we get rainfall. And so rainfall is going to be a watering, basically, and we don't want to saturate it too much when it's not using it. So best tool that you got for checking if it needs to be watered, right here on your hand. Just take your finger, put it in there. If it's dry, it needs to be watered. If it's wet, about 2 to 3 inches deep, then you're fine. You don't need to water right away. In a container in the summer, that's going to be the most important thing, is we're going to water to get it through that summer, and you could be watering up to once a day, as little as maybe probably every other day, every third day you might get away with it. Depends on the location and where your yard is. If it's in a shady location under a tree in a container, out in your landscape, then it might do a little bit better. If you're in a windy spot, it's probably going to dry out a little bit faster. If it's in a sunny spot, it's going to dry out faster. So just kind of important to know. Go check it. Make sure you're okay. If you do get a little bit of that burn on the tips of the leaves, then that's okay. We just don't want it to get worse than that. We don't want it to extend further than that. But watering is important to know. In the ground, water deep less often. In a container, make sure to keep it wet. Make sure that drainage hole is draining, but also make sure that you're keeping it evenly moist to some degree. It can dry out some, but you don't want to let it stay dry too long. All right, so now feeding, of course, really, really important. These are the 3 products I'm going to talk about. They're probably the most important products that you can use when feeding your Japanese maple. When do we feed our Japanese maple? We're going to feed it about twice a year. You can do it as much as 3 times a year, especially if you're trying to pump some growth out of them. But typically I feed mine about twice a year. I feed it in the spring after it's leafed out and we're past the frost date. So that's typically around April 15th, April 20th. I feel free to go out. My Japanese maples have leafed out, and I know it's not going to frost, so I can go ahead and give it a nice little feed. And I always love a granular feed. And my #1 is our McDonald Greenleaf plant foods. So I've got an organic formulation and I've got a traditional formula. These are great because they have our macronutrients, our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but they also have our trace elements: boron, copper, zinc, molybdenum, some of those smaller things that our soil here in this area lacks, and Japanese maples need some of those trace elements. So this is a great one. I use this every spring and then again in the fall. So in the fall you can feed again. You can also use completely other type of fertilizer. So our green leaf's an all-purpose plant food for the Hampton Roads area. This is Happy Frog. This is made by Fox Farm. This is specifically for Japanese maples. It's a 4-3-4. It's an organic formula. So the nice thing about an organic is, you could accidentally dump the whole bag on there. You're not going to kill your plant. But it's got all of those things that Japanese maples need. And so this is a great formulation specifically for Japanese maples. So maybe if you're collecting Japanese maples, or you've got 5 or 6 in containers that you really want to take care of and give them some special attention, this is a great option for you because it's got everything that a Japanese maple needs. It's a really, really good formulation and completely organic and safe. So that makes it really, really nice. And again, we want to fertilize twice a year. We're going to fertilize in the spring and in the fall. And in the fall, I typically say somewhere around that October 15th to November 15th time frame, as it's starting to kind of shut down, give a little bit of food to kind of get it through the fall winter season. The other one is when we're planting Japanese maples, is Biotone Starter. So Biotone Starter is a great one because it's a starter fertilizer, and it's actually going to feed your plant for the first probably 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, 4 weeks. But the best benefit is the mycorrhizae and beneficial bacteria. What that's going to do for your plant is they form a symbiotic relationship. It's going to extend the root system of your plant. It's going to help it increase its water retention capacity, be able to get to more water because it's going to be a bigger root system. And they share things. You know, the mycorrhizae give to the plant what they don't want, and they take from the plant what the plant doesn't want. So it's a great symbiotic relationship that can live with that plant for the life of the plant. So, you know, you start to think about these Japanese maples living 30, 40, 50, 100 years old, and you've formed that relationship early on. This is the go-to #1 starter fertilizer, Biotone Starter by Espoma. It's absolutely amazing. So, if you're planting, use Biotone. If you've got established trees, maybe you've purchased a home with a tree, use our green leaf or Happy Frog Japanese maple food. Really, really simple. Twice a year, pretty simple. In a container, you could do a little bit more, but you probably don't need to. I still recommend a spring and a fall, and that's it. Really, really simple. All right, let's talk real quick about insects and diseases. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this because the good news is they typically don't get a whole lot. Yeah, they can get aphids and they can get mealybugs and scale, and you might even see some like rose slugs, which are, you know, a little bit of a caterpillar that get on the leaves. There's a couple different things there. Disease-wise, there's not a whole lot of funguses out there, but to talk about some solutions, some basic solutions, one of my go-to all-time favorites, of course, I probably didn't grab it, did I? Is Triple Action. Triple Action's a good one, and I didn't grab it. But Triple Action is a great preventative. So I usually spray Triple Action over my entire yard because, especially in the spring kind of season, it kind of gives it a good start because it's got chrysanthemum oil, Neem Oil, which is a great one. That's what this one is. So it's got Neem Oil, but it's also got pyrethrum, that's from chrysanthemums. And the Neem Oil is from the neem tree. But it's got both of them in there. And so chrysanthemum oil, which is pyrethrin, that is going to kill insects, and then your neem oil is going to suffocate. So it's a great kind of organic solution to spray everywhere and kind of be preventative rather than curative. So it's a great option. Now, if you are worried about your Japanese maple, there are a couple things that you can use. Neem oil is a great one, and horticulture oil. These are my two oils. Neem oil and horticultural oil. These are completely organic, completely safe, and what these are going to do is suffocate. So they're going to suffocate those insects that are hard to kind of get to, like your scale specifically, because they're harder to kill sometimes. Aphids, it'll work on those. Mealybugs, some of those slower moving insects. These are great. Japanese beetles actually sometimes be a problem, so it's not a bad idea that if you have Japanese beetles to maybe treat it with a systemic insect spray. Systemic insect sprays actually go into the system of the plant, last for the entire season. So if you know that that's happening and you've had it every year, you might treat with a systemic insect spray to help be more preventative and to have that already in there built into the system. These last about 6 to 8 weeks. You can actually buy a drench that can last up to 8 to 10 months. So a couple different options there. The nice thing about systemic insect sprays is they go into the system and they last for a long time. If you have any kind of disease or fungus issues, then you can use our Fertilome Systemic Insect Spray, Fertilome Systemic Fungicide. This is a really, really good one. Same idea with the insecticide, goes into the system of the plant and treats those diseases from the inside out. So that's a really good one. Now, a lot of times, it's hard to kind of understand what's happening with the Japanese maple, and a lot of times you might not be quite sure what's happening. And so I always have this guy laying around my house. I've got the Super Thrive in my medicine cabinet in my garage because it's super, super important to have this around, because what this is a hormone basically, or I've always say a vitamin supplement, I should say. It's a really, really good vitamin supplement that you can use for your plants that might be struggling. And sometimes Japanese maples struggle for unknown reasons, and maybe they're just getting older in age, or maybe something has happened underneath the ground that we can't see. It's under stress for some reason, and that's what Super Thrive does, is it just takes the stress off of your plants. Comes in a concentrated form here, as well as a foliar spray. Really, really good. I probably don't use the foliar spray as much on my Japanese maples, but I love this one because it goes, it goes a long way. And so I can just put this in a watering can and then water it really, really well. And then that's a great way of getting it to the root system, and it kind of just takes the shock off of the tree. So if you're not quite sure what's happening to your maple, but you know it's not doing real well, it's not doing what you want it to do, it's a little bit stressed out, then try Super Thrive. It's one of my go-to, especially when people come in and they're like, I'm not quite sure. Try Super Thrive. It's only gonna help. It's never gonna hurt. So it's a great thing. All right, let's talk about pruning. Pruning is our last stop on this 101 Japanese Maple 101 class tour here that we've been on. I've given you lots of great broad kind of information so you can grow your Japanese maples. Now that you've grown one, or maybe you've got a young one, or you're trying to train one, let's talk about how we can do that. The most important thing, of course, is have the right kinds of tools. We're going to need bypass pruners for sure. That's what you see over there is bypass pruners. You might need some lopping shears. You see those up in that top corner. I'll show you some here. You might even need a pruning saw, maybe a ladder. Depends on how big your Japanese maples are. The most important thing is to take your time and to understand the techniques of simple pruning techniques and timing. If we're going to be doing major pruning with a Japanese maple, what do we want to do? We want to prune in the winter. So late winter, early spring is the best time to do that. That's when the sap is rising up out of the ground, out of the root system, and it's going into the branches, and that means it'll heal off those wounds pretty quick. Also, there's no insects or diseases typically in that time frame. So in this Hampton Roads area, I'm typically talking about that February, mid-February to mid-March time frame. So we'll say you got about a month time frame to do major pruning. Now, any other pruning you can really do pretty much any time of the year. If something happens, you have a windstorm and a branch breaks, we need to prune it. If you've got dead wood in there, you can always prune that out. If you want to do some tipping, crossing branches, things like that, limbing up, then it just depends on what the size of the diameter of the tree is. I usually say if it's bigger than a quarter, wait till the winter. If it's smaller than a quarter, then probably you're safe to go ahead and prune it any time of the year. So let's talk about a couple different ways to prune. Let me show you some of the tools here real quick that you might need. So bypass pruners, of course, are anything that's kind of like a scissor, crosses its blade. This is a lopping shear. Lopping shears are going to be good for bigger branches that maybe a pair of hand pruners can't quite get to. Gives you a little bit more torque power. These are really good. I won't need these today because I'm working on just some small ones. Pruning saw is a really good one. I love this banana saw. It's one of my favorite saws. I can slip it in the back pocket. It's got this kind of built-in, it's almost like a pocket knife. So it sheathes in there. And that means I can put it in my back pocket. I can have it whenever I need it. It's a great thing to use on Japanese maples. It's got this actually a little slicing blade on the bottom that you can use on some of those smaller twigs. But it's a really, really easy one if you start to get into that thicker diameter. It might even be slightly bigger than what the lopping shear can take care of. But 9 times out of 10, what are you going to use? Your old trusty handheld bypass pruners. And that's what I use here. These are my old Felcos that I've used for about 15 years now. So you can get a really nice pair like this, or you can, I know it doesn't look nice, but I've had them for a long time and they work just like they came out of the package, like brand new. But you can also get just an inexpensive pair. I like the inexpensive pairs. I have probably 15 pairs of pruners laying around my house because every once in a while I just need to grab one and go and use it. The most important thing probably is to clean them every once in a while, especially if they're nicer like this. Grease them up every once in a while to keep them moving nice and smooth, but also using a little bit of rubbing alcohol to clean off the blade, especially if you're concerned that you might be working with something that could be diseased. Then you want to disinfect your pruners between each prune. Now, what I want to do real quick is go through some images real quick of some old established maples to get you inspired and to kind of get you in this kind of zen moment of how to prune these Japanese maples. So here's a great example of probably what a lot of us maybe even have, somewhere around a 6 to 8 foot weeping lace leaf Japanese maple that looks like Cousin It, which is perfectly fine. If you like this look, then that's great. And a lot of landscapes need this kind of look, this kind of bushy, full look. But we can train these and we can turn these into some amazing specimens. Not that this isn't an amazing specimen. So it's to the eye of the beholder. It is to whatever you want to do and whatever you want to make it. But we'll talk about how we could change this if we wanted to. Here you go. Here's an old established and shows you kind of how that shape has, changed over the years. And naturally, if these just grow naturally in the woodland setting, this is what it's going to do. It's going to be reaching out for its light. It's going to be looking for that light. And that's what's so cool about Japanese maples is they're unique and different, and we can get them to this look a little bit faster by using some of these techniques I'm going to show you. Here's another one, opening up the habit, seeing on the inside, seeing all that contortion and that cool look. Again, just inspiring, trying to think of different ways that we can show off what these Japanese maples can offer. Here's another one. Great, of course, Japanese maples. All of your weeping, your lace leaf, your dissected varieties are going to have one of the most unique looks to them, especially as they age. We have some of them here at the Independence location that are probably approaching this age that are just absolutely amazing, and we can limb them up and we can really show off that habit. You can almost sit underneath them. They're so old, but really, really cool look, and we can get there and we can push it to do this a little bit faster if we want. And then, of course, limbing it up or keeping it low limbed. So this is a little bit of a lower branch tree. It sits in a woodland area. So obviously, you know, nothing that I need to mow underneath of probably. It looks like it's kind of set off into a wooded area where not a lot of grass is growing, so I don't need to worry about it. I can kind of let it be and I don't need to touch it much. Or we could go in and limb this up, and we can show you how to do that here in a second. Building the canopy. We want to talk about, you know, how to build out our canopy on our larger specimens, the ones that we want to enjoy the shade and make them look really, really cool and kind of create that upward habit. We can help kind of encourage that along as well. Exposing the interior of a Japanese maple. I talk about that a lot. It's really part of that bonsai kind of culture, and bonsai is really more of I won't say a frame of mind. I don't 100% understand bonsai. It deals with a lot of different things like triangles and things like that. But basically, what makes bonsai cool to the novice, to someone like me, is seeing the habit of the tree, seeing all the different angles and things that it's going and reaching for and looking for. And you can do kind of a bonsai look with a full-grown Japanese maple. And that's kind of what this is exposing that interior. And then, of course, limbing up or taking a weeping Japanese maple and creating an umbrella look. We can do that as well. We can create a plateaued look. So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, another great example of, you know, underplanting with some companion plants there. It looks like that might be cotoneaster, maybe a little bit of a rose. But you've got this great Japanese maple and just that unique habit. Really cool when it rains and that bark turns that dark brown color. It's absolutely stunning. And then, of course, here's another example. I'm in the way here. Let me move my image out of the way. But this is a great way of showing off that kind of that trunk, that bottom portion. You know, that tree I would probably take that lower limb off of. I can see where it looks like it's grass. I can't imagine that's ground cover. It doesn't look like moss either. But that would be maybe where I would kind of limb up that branch a little bit so that I could really kind of expose that bottom portion of that tree and allow someone to walk underneath its canopy and enjoy it. And then, of course, here's a huge old specimen, and you can just see how cool that is with the canopy growing up. Really, really unique, and everything about those weeping Japanese maples is unique and cool. And here's another example of a very old specimen that has been limbed up, obviously. Probably a little bit of a natural growing, but I can see a couple prune marks in there, so it's definitely been pruned by a human, and it looks really, really cool with that unique kind of bark. It's almost got that contortion, that muscle look inside. So just obviously a super, super strong specimen. Really, really cool looking. And then again, building out that canopy so that we can, you know, enjoy the look of the trunks and as well as the leaves, and then sit underneath it and enjoy the canopy. All right, so now let's take a quick moment. I will go through and prune some of these for you so you can see them. And I'll probably clear out a little bit just to get some of this stuff out of our line of sight here. I don't know what I can do with that one. That one's on the edge of its table. So let's first start with that Graft Point. So this is a great one here. You know, this is a tree, looks great on the top. I don't really need to do much up there, but what I do need to do is I need to eliminate these shoots of growth. One that's coming from above the graft point, one that's coming from below the graft point. So we know that this is actually going to be the desirable maple because I can see right there. There we go, focus on that. So you can see that's the graft point right here. So that's below the graft, that's above the graft. This is coming out of that top portion. And you can usually see a change in color usually. You're gonna see this is kind of starting to callus up. That's where they grafted it. So you can see that is a different color, and this is that bright green, and this is the older rootstock. But this piece is actually gonna be a desirable maple, but I don't need it because I've got this great canopy forming up here. I don't need that piece. So most important thing is use a pair of sharp pruners and make a nice clean cut and get pretty close, especially when we're dealing with little tiny pieces like this. Get pretty close. We don't want to leave a big stub there. We don't want to leave any kind of piece out there. I'll show you a little bit more of that here in a little bit. So you can see how close that looks. It almost looks like it's not there. Now with little tiny pieces like this, you can actually use your fingers and just kind of go in and just pluck it off. So that way you know that you get it nice and close. And let's see, I don't see anything else. So there we go. I just took off. So that is our undesirable wild maple. And see how like hard it is to see the difference? This leaf is a little bit smaller. Desirable maple, undesirable maple. Rootstock, not rootstock. You can see it in actually the serration of the leaves. So you can see this one over here, the one that I'm shaking. That one's got more of a serrated leaf. That one's got a little bit more of a smoother edge leaf. But very, very hard to tell other than to now you know what the graft point is, and now you know to keep that off. This one, I wouldn't do anything else with. It's got this great looking little canopy on it. And what I will do today, as I'm going to be pruning some of these smaller ones, is try and envision a bigger tree. This could be a huge trunk, and then these could be 2 big branches coming off of it. And that's what this will be over time. But try and kind of think of that as I prune some of these smaller little specimens. Think of it, it could be 10 times the size of what I'm pruning. So think of it that way too. That might help you kind of realize how you can shape and change your tree that might be very, very established that you want to kind of change the look of it. Okay, so let's take another good kind of small example here of a red broadleaf maple that's upright, just to kind of talk about what limbing up is. So this is a cool looking branch, cool looking tree. You know, it doesn't, I literally could do nothing to this if I wanted to. But let's say this is a bigger tree and I'm trying to mow the grass around it. So, you know, imagine here I am, you know, mowing the grass around this Japanese maple, and this branch is in my way. It's also younger. It's not as established as these up here. It's not as strong as these up here. And it's just in my way, and it doesn't need to be there. I'm trying to build out this canopy. I want to put a bench underneath. I want to, you know, underplant it with some shrubs, whatever it might be. So limbing up is an easy technique. Now, here's where I'll say one of the most important things about pruning anything is you can't put it back on. So make sure you don't want it before you cut it, because you can't stick it back on and say, oops, I made that mistake. So I know that I don't want these little tiny twigs. So again, I'm getting as close as I can. And I'm taking those 2 little pieces off. And then I could say, let's just see. I don't want to take it off. Maybe I'm not quite sure what I want to do here. Let me put this up against my shirt so maybe you can see a little bit better. Let's say, okay, maybe I want this branch to grow out. Well, but I don't like this one here. So we can take that off. And then we can say, no, you know what? I don't like it. So let me do a bad cut so you can see what a bad cut looks like. So if I went and cut this branch off, because we know we don't want it, we're trying to build out that canopy, but I leave that little stub right there, that is actually going to encourage more growth to come from here. So basically, I'll show you what a tipping technique is here in a little bit, but that's basically like saying, hey, keep growing from here. Now, if I can take it back to the collar of the tree, and the collar is kind of where you can see that kind of callousy spot around where the branch meets the trunk, then I won't get as much regrowth from it. Not to say it won't ever happen, it can, but what you want to do is, I always like to put my blade side to the cut. So I'll show you here. Let me see if I can do this close. That's why I chose these small ones, so I can try and get some close-ups. Instead of going like this, so can you see that? Where my actual cutting blade is on the outside, I like to turn it. So let's turn it, the tree. Now my blade is on the inside, and I can get that blade right up on the collar, and I can cut it off. So now you can see it almost looks like it's not even there. Now, if you get little shoots of new growth or you see little buds starting to form throughout here, you can easily go through, if you don't want them, then you can easily go through there and just pick those off. Sometimes you'll see like, here's a, yep, there's a little example right there. So you can see that little guy right there. See that little nub right there? That's a new bud forming. And so I can just go in with my fingers and just pick it off. Real easy. That way that leaf won't come out, and it puts all the energy back into the top. That's where I want it to grow. I want to build that canopy. So I'm taking the energy out of these things that are using energy, food, resources to grow and to establish and to stay, and I'm putting it into where I want it to grow. So that's one great technique. It's called limbing up. It's very, very simple. Let's do it on a little bit of another one here. This is kind of that dwarf broadleaf red maple. This one's only going to be about 6 to 8 feet tall, but here's a great example of how to limb up a tree, and I might have a better one here in a second, but this has a lot of branches at the bottom. It's a dwarf. It's got 2 really nice big thick stalks here, but if I just left it 2, I don't know that it's exactly what I would desire out of my maple, so I don't want to cut either one of these out, and I don't really want to eliminate these either. But I do want to create a way to kind of create a little bit of a trunk here. So I'm going to take these and say they're all trunks. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 branches that come off the main stalk here. I'm going to say they're all trunks. And then we just each limb each one of those up. So all I'm going to do here is with the smaller growth down here at the bottom, we're just going to go in and just kind of pluck that off. Keep that new growth out, and we're just going to keep it nice and simple. Just make sure you don't do anything harmful to it, ripping it off. But because it's that nice young growth, I don't really have to worry about it too much. So all I'm doing is just taking that up. Now at some point I got to say, let me stop, let me catch up over here. Now I'm going to need my pruners. I want to get this bushiness out of here. I want to be able to see inside the tree. And so all I'm going to do is just kind of open it up here a little bit. And what a lot of times you'll see is when you do this, you might discover some issues, which I thought I was going to discover here, but it looks like I might be okay. So now what I'm trying to do is just get it all to the same tier. So you can see now I've got this kind of cool looking thing. Now, usually I would say odds are always better, especially when I'm doing multiple trunks, these branches that I'm turning into trunks. So I would probably say eliminate one of these. Now I'm not quite sure which one of these smaller, newer twigs is actually going to be more aggressive. So I might let them compete for a little bit longer just to see how big they might get. And then once I see the dominant one, I might take the other one out and create this kind of cool 3-trunk system, like maybe a crepe myrtle, but you'd have a central trunk here, but you'd have 3 major branches that we're now going to treat as trunks. I could keep going higher if I want to build that canopy. So you can see I've got these 2 up here. And this is still a little bushy down here, so let's see if I want to expose some of that habit. Let's see if I bring it all up to that same level. Now all I'm doing here, just so I know you can't quite see because I'm trying to do it real quick for you, is all I'm doing is just taking some of this new growth off and just trying to get that canopy up to the same height and trying to expose that uniqueness of inside. So there we go. Now it's all about at the same height, right? So all of our leaves are about at the same height. And so now I could probably just leave it, and then I could always come back and check on it later and kind of play with it and tinker with it if I wanted to. But that's going to create that kind of bushy habit up here, but it's going to expose some of this down here, which is going to be really cool to see and make it unusual. Otherwise, it's going to be a big bush, which is cool by itself. I've seen big ones of these. That Shayna is an old school variety. This one's called that Haim Shoujo. So this one is just a different variety of that, basically a different kind of a similar characteristic. But this is going to be a big bush, and I've seen big bushes of them, and it's absolutely stunning. But I've also seen people go in and prune them out and kind of do some really cool, unique things with it. All right, let's see what else I got. Okay, let's go. I'm going to try and keep it in the broadleaf. I'll do the lace leaf here at the end. So here's a big, bushy, imagine this is a big tree, right? So we've got lots of things going on in here, but it's bushy, it's full from the base to the top. I've got this kind of wild shoot off the top here that's really reaching out. So I'll be able to show you a lot of different techniques here with this one. But let's first start at the bottom. I want to build the canopy. I want to be able to show off some of the habit. So we're going to have to do some major pruning. Imagine this is a big tree, right? So imagine this is, let's say 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall. I would do this in the winter then because it's a little miniature tree and I'm just using hand pruners, then I can do it right now. But I've got these, branches at the bottom. They're consuming energy and they're making it look like a big bush. So I want to make this look like a tree. So I'm going to go in, get as close as I can, and take that branch off. And just like that, in just 2 prunes, we've got a tree. Look at that. And it's really cool because it's kind of contorted. I'm actually going to take this little weaker shoot off here because I don't need that. And then I'm going to take some of this twiggy growth out. This is where I say you can't put it back on, so go as far as you want, but at some point you're probably going to have to say stop, take a second, look back. So I've got a broken branch up here, so I'm going to take that out. And now let's see where we're at. Okay, so definitely it looks like a tree now. I've definitely got a break here where it starts to form some multiple branches. I could try and expose that. Now that will eliminate this branch, which I kind of like because it's really reaching out and it's creating this very cool habit. But maybe it's reaching out a little too far. I've also got this big branch up here at the top. So I'm trying to kind of even it out a little bit. Now, if this was a big tree, I might not be doing it. It's nice to start these kind of young, this kind of training technique, because once it gets 15 to 20 feet tall, maybe you don't want to be up there climbing around trying to change it. I'm going to take a little bit of this weaker wood out of here. So this is a little bit of a bigger branch, but it's just going to try and thin this out a little bit. And then I'm going to keep this branch and see this big kind of offshoot over here, this big branch here. I'm going to keep it, but I'm going to start to limit out because I want to, again, I always want to see the interior of my tree as much as I possibly can without really hurting it. Not that I would hurt it by pruning it, but without really hurting the kind of the shape of the tree or major branches. So here we go. So I've kept it. I might come back and prune it. I might tip it back a little bit. So we'll talk about tipping here as I go up. Now I see a branch here that's dead wood. So let me see, let me drop this down here so you can see. So right here, I've got this little piece of dead wood. So we'll cut that out. It's not gonna do anything. And you can do dead wood anytime. You're gonna find dead wood in your Japanese maples as they get older. They usually turn kind of like a grayish color, and you just go in and clip those out real simply. So look for crossing branches. That's another good thing to look for. Look for where a branch is crossing with another branch and it's gonna cause rubbing. You don't see it a whole lot in Japanese maples, but you will see it sometimes. Now, I'm gonna talk about that tipping technique. I'm gonna leave this canopy right here, this portion of the tree. So look, I've got two portions. I've got this guy that's really nice and bushy, and I like that. But this shoot here has gone wild on me. It's really growing out. It's kind of cool, but it's really weighing the tree over. Like if I were gonna grow this in a container, it would definitely fall over this way all the time. So I'm actually gonna do this technique called tipping. Let's see if I can pull this down here so you can see. So I've got this wild shoot here. Let's get it turned. Great section, wild section here. Same tree. Definitely not an offshoot from below the graft, but I'm going to do what I call tipping. And tipping is what I basically am going to force the tree to establish branching back here. So this is really bushy and full. I love this. I want the whole thing to look like that, but I got this great branch. I don't want to take it all the way off. I definitely don't want to lose that. It's got a lot of energy stored up in it, but I want to even out the tree. So what I'm going to basically do is take this branch back into here so that it fills in back here. So all I'm going to do is take it back to where I see these leaves. I'm going to cut a little bit of an angle. You always want to cut at an angle. I didn't mention that earlier. But when we're doing tipping, it's really important to cut it at an angle that's not flat. So if I cut it up here like a flat top, then water can collect on the top and we can have rotting issues. Otherwise, cut it at an angle that's not flat and the water will drip right off. But now you can see I've got this great looking tree. Now let's talk about this branch down here. It is a little bit of a wild shoot, but I like these little lower branches kind of still in there. I could take it all the way up, but it's gonna look a little lollipop, and I don't want a Japanese maple to be lollipop. So I wanna keep these branches, but I'm gonna tip this one back because it is a little bit wild and a little bit out of shape. There we go. So now we've got this great canopy. If this were a bigger tree, I could see that really cool structure and that habit. I can see myself sitting underneath it. And then I've got this great canopy up at the top so you can look up through it. And then just that nice fullness because I've taken and tipped this big branch back that's kind of growing wild. So there's a couple different techniques right in there. Love to limb up my Japanese maples. Let me see what else I got here. That's not gonna show a whole lot. Maybe let's do this one, I think. This one's a bigger one, and I think you'll be able to see it. I don't know that I would do anything. Oh, let me show you one other thing real quick. I've got that coral bark maple, that wildfire maple, but this is a very common thing that you see a lot. See how it just didn't leaf out up here? Now, it could be stressed out. It could be that it's got some sort of fungus or disease issue. I seriously doubt it. It looks healthy, but it is not leafing out. But it is forming a new shoot of growth right here. So you can see that really kind of bright kind of foliage there. That's got that orange tinge to it. So this is not going to come out most likely. It's stressed. In fact, up here at the top, I can actually see it changing color. See where it's gone from red to brown? So it's going to start dying back. These buds don't feel viable anymore where the leaf nodes are coming out. They don't feel real good. So let's go ahead and nip that in the bud and get it out of here. And you might see this from time to time, especially on younger maples. So what I want to do is cut it at an angle because it is a branch. So there we go. Just take it right off to where that new shoot's coming out. It's definitely healthy there. I've got a few more of them. So we'll just take that out. I got another one. Now here's a good example of something that I don't like to do a whole lot, or that I don't recommend doing, is I've got this one here. So you can see that little tiny branch right there. Let me get it on my forehead here so you can see it. And it's definitely dying back. And I've got a little bit of growth here that's coming out. Looks good, looks fresh, looks new. but I don't like to cut into tiny little wood that I want to regrow. So I'm actually going to take that and actually cut it in a little bit further. And that goes back to that tipping method. So I'm actually going to cut in a little bit further because now I've cut into thicker wood. And when you cut into thicker wood, you're going to get bigger, better growth habit from behind it. If I just take that little tiny tip off, it's going to be slow to kind of produce more growth. But cutting into a little bit of thicker wood is a good option. Here's another one. That one's actually pretty weak right there. So I'm going to come back just a little bit and just cut that off. Cutting at an angle. And there we go. I've got all my little, what I would call dead tips off. I definitely don't want this branch down here. I want to force it into the canopy. So let's take these little wild shoots off, make sure it's a nice smooth trunk. Oh, I had a little piece below the graft there that I took off, so that's good. And there we go. I probably wouldn't touch it from there. See, now that looks already 10 times better. And all those little branches that are going to eventually turn brown, I've nipped it in the bud. I don't need to worry about it. And it's a nice full-looking tree again. And so now it's going to continue to grow and be very healthy. Let's see, do I want to do, yeah, let's do this big one. Let's see, I just want to show you one more time because I think a lot of us have trees that maybe look like this in our yard. You know, we're not quite sure what to do. It's so low branch, it's kind of in our way, and we want to turn it into this really, really cool canopy tree. And so a lot of us have these multi-trunks, so I want to kind of show that one more time. We don't really need to do anything to the top of this tree, but I do want to show one more time how to kind of limb up. So let's see if I can get this over here so that you can kind of see it without blocking too much. All right, let's take this tag off, get that out of our way, if I can. All right, so I see that I've got these kind of this really cool V shape. I've got some nice big branches, but I want to lift the canopy up into here. So I'm going to go in, and I don't want to eliminate anything big, but I am going to eliminate all this smaller wood out of here. Always trying to keep my blade side as flush as I can. And just keep working it up. And just always being thoughtful about each cut and saying, I can't put it back on, so let me make sure I'm cutting what I really want to cut here. All right, now I've done this branch, so you can see I've done this. I've got a little bit of a scab here. Let's talk about Pruning Sealer real quick while I got a second. A lot of people want to use pruning sealers. I don't recommend them. The only time I would ever recommend a pruning sealer is if something major drastic has happened. It's either at the wrong time, which for a Japanese maple wouldn't really be too much of an issue. Again, not a lot of insect or disease issues, but let's say something happened and a branch broke and it created a bad scar that maybe is convex, that's going to capture water. And there's nothing that you can really do about it. I mean, you'd have to do some major pruning that you just couldn't afford to do. Then you might use a pruning sealer just to protect that, keep water from entering it. But otherwise, let them heal naturally. You don't really need a pruning sealer. So they're pretty easy to take care of. Okay, so I've got this offshoot here that I'm now treating as a trunk. Then I took, and I'm treating these as trunks here. So I've limbed those up. Limbed those up to about as high as I really want to go right now. Now I'm going to take this other major trunk, and sometimes I'll do this. Do I want that branch? Let's see what it looks like without it. So, you know, yep, I don't need that one. It's not big enough to worry about. I would probably stop there. But you can just see, just by doing that little limbing up, I've exposed this habit. I forced the canopy to where I want it to go. I could come back and play with it a little bit more. I've got, you know, here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 branches coming off of this one area, all in this cluster. I probably don't need all of those. But I think for now I'm just going to leave it and just kind of keep it really cool. And now I've kind of lifted that canopy up. I've created that upward habit. And I've exposed the trunk, which gives me that unique look that I always want out of them. All right, let's do some weeping Japanese maples here real quick. Let me clean up some of my clippings here. The weeping Japanese maples are a little bit trickier, but there's a lot of different techniques that you can do here. So let's take this green gem, and this is going to be kind of funny because it's going to consume a major portion of the screen here. But this is a great chance to show you kind of all the different things. If I planted this in the ground, some of these branches are literally going to be like on the ground. So I definitely don't need that. So I'll probably do some tipping there. I see a little bit of dead wood inside. I see some crossing branches, and I see some weaker wood on the inside. So let me actually, you don't need to see me. Let's see if I can show you the maple here. And then you can kind of see inside. You can kind of see all the different things that are happening in here. So I've got this really unique habit. This is what I'm seeing. I do have a major crossing branch here. That might be something I might have to take care of. So you can see where this branch crosses this branch. But that might be okay if I can get some separation there. And then I've got just some weak wood that I really want to clean out of there. I want to expose the interior a little bit and kind of show off that habit. So let's start with, let me see if I can turn this. Okay, there we go. So now you can see what I'm seeing. So I'm going to take out some of this little weak wood in here. Because really what's going to happen here is I've got this major system. Now that one was actually reaching up and getting up into the canopy. But I'm going to really just trying to expose the interior here. So I'm taking out some of this tinier wood on the inside. And there we go. See that? From that angle, now you can see what I was seeing, really. Just that really nice kind of exposure. Got a little bit of dead wood in here. Bad prune. Get that out. Now, here's the crossing branch section. See if I can turn this up so you can see it. 2 branches, major crossing, lots of rubbing happening in here. This branch is actually stuck in there, probably from wind. So we know we don't want that one. It's on the bottom half of this branch. So let's take that one off. This one's kind of shooting up and back across, which will create something unique in the future. That branch coming back across, but these are 2 major branches, and I don't want to lose either one of them, and that's going to cause rubbing issues in the future, so it's got to come out. Now this one's a pretty major portion here. I've got a little side branch that I can take out. That prevents those from rubbing. So now this has got some pretty good space to it. Now over time, that could cause issues, but for today, I don't need to worry about it. And then this one, let's eliminate this guy to allow that to have some freedom. Now, as I got out here, all of a sudden I noticed this guy's been pruned up here. So you can see this one's been pruned. And I've got a little bit of a dead kind of branch, but look at all of that gorgeous new growth. That's why I love Japanese maples. Look at that just amazing color from that new leaf that just came out. This new burst of growth off of this branch. It probably broke on us maybe, and we did a great job of pruning on an angle. We cut it back, and then we've got this one kind of branch here that's kind of helping protect it and kind of keep that system going. Now, what we could consider doing, and maybe in the future I'll do it, but I don't think I'll do it today. But what we could consider doing is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the branch I'm kind of worried about because this is the broken one. So there's the broken branch. And you see this big offshoot here? This is a good sized branch that comes off of here. And I could actually take and force this maple to go a certain direction. This is a great technique to consider using. Is I could take this major chunk off here, this big branch, and that'll force this tree to send all its energy out because it'll stop here and shoot out here, and then I form that branch, and it's actually going to get it away from this nicer crossing branch. So I think I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. I kind of like that idea. So what I've done there is I took off this big chunk, but now you can see that branch, and it just shoots right out into this. So it comes up here, and then it's going to go this way, and now that branch is really going to form that way, and this branch is going to continue to be able to go this way, and we won't run into any of that rubbing issues in the future. So that's a really, really good choice there, and that was a good fix for that problem. Now, tipping on this, I'm going to tip it a little bit. There's a couple different techniques for tipping a weeping Japanese maple. Limbing up is one thing too. Remember that big picture I showed, that cousin-it looking thing? That is easy. You just need to go inside and be careful not to take off too much and just slowly work your canopy up so you can expose some of that stuff. And realize you might have multiple trunks in there. So you don't want to go and just take off the lowest branches and then step back and say, I lost my entire tree. Because some of those lower branches might curve and come back up and be a top portion of your tree. So go in, keep your major branches, work some of the smaller stuff, take your time, get in a zen moment, take your, have a glass of wine or a beer and get out there and enjoy pruning your Japanese maple for a little bit of time. And be slow and be thoughtful about what you're doing because you don't want to take it off because yes, it'll regrow, it'll be fine, but you don't want to take off too much. I mean, you could take off, 10 years worth of growth by just making one little simple mistake. But tipping is a great habit for these weeping Japanese maples. I'm going to show you right here on this branch right here. Because if I planted this is going to be close to the ground. So what I find really easy with a weeping Japanese maple is basically you just go back to a leaf that is kind of upright. So you can kind of see right here, this leaf right here is kind of poking on the top side of that branch. So that's where I'm going to come to. Now what that's going to do is force that plant to kind of plateau out. What that means, or that branch to kind of plateau out. So what it's going to do is it's going to grow like this. And then if I tip it again, it's going to grow like that. And then you can create this really kind of cool umbrella habit out of it. Don't have to, but that is an option. But really what I'm doing is just trying to keep these branches from rubbing all over the ground. So if somebody wants to buy this one, it's ready to go right into the ground. And all I'm doing is just going around and doing a little bit of tipping all the way around. Also, what this is going to do is spur growth. So every plant grows from a terminal bud. The terminal bud is that very end point of that branch, right? So it's going to continue to grow from there. It's going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then all of a sudden, it'll break a branch off here and there. But if I go and I take this off, then it's going to force it to branch out from behind. So that's what tipping really does, is it kind of forces that habit. Now, sometimes I might not want to tip it because I want to enjoy this gorgeous new growth that just came on this. So sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends. And it's just kind of one of those things that you can kind of play with, and just over time you'll just kind of start to feel it and you'll start to get it. It's not necessarily an art form. It can be, but it can be very simple too. And it also lifts that canopy up and gets that upward. All right, let's pull this back here so you can see. Now we can see, look at that gorgeous habit on the inside. It's not going to rub and be on the ground anywhere. And what this will also do for this type of maple is it'll force the habit upward a little bit. Maybe I don't want this to grow so low and prostrate and on the ground. Maybe I want it to grow it a little bit upright. I can also help do that by just taking a piece of bamboo and staking it. So I can actually take some bamboo and just take one of these branches and get it growing upward, because every weeping Japanese maple, I can get this out of my way, is going to grow in a weeping habit. So it's going to keep on kind of bounding over itself. Of course, you can see it in that one Ryusi that I showed earlier. So this one just wants to keep on going over top of itself and over top of itself and over top of itself. And what happens is you never get any height out of it. I've seen Ryusis grown straight up. You just have to take a branch and get it staked up. They're pretty flexible branches, so you just got to take this and stake it, and that'll take it and start growing it upwards. Now, I don't know that I'll prune this one here today because it probably would take me some time to really do a very good job. But basically what I would do with this one is assume that it's going to grow in a container and just be a big trailing kind of thing. But I would love to open it up and kind of see this really cool habit. So maybe I'll do a little bit of clipping on it just so we can see what that would look like. Because it's really, really full. There's lots and lots of branches in here. There's not real good airflow either, so a lot of this is going to help kind of create that airflow. So I got one big branch that's really, and this is tricky because it's really in there. So you might have to get different types of pruners to get in there, to get into those tight spaces sometimes. We've got lots and lots of like pinpoint ones. There we go. That opened it up a little bit. And then I've got this guy that's literally crossing back across. So we'll take that off, a little broken branch. And just like that, I've exposed the interior of this Japanese maple. So you can see, look at that habit. Now, you can see from that side now what I was seeing. Now let me take this side and see if I can do it. Let me see if I can do it so that you can see it actually happen. It's gonna be tricky because it's gonna be opposite of me. But this is very full, right? And I want to kind of expose that, open it up a little bit. I got a downward facing branch that's eventually just gonna run right into the ground. So let me take that guy out. And that helped right there. Got another one there. This is blocking a little bit, this branch right here. It's coming from this shoot over here. Let's see, it's coming all the way. So if I took that all the way off, that actually helps everybody. And there we go. Just exposes the inside, makes it look really, really cool. Just got a couple crossing branches here that I can kind of take out. And now I've got this great, unique, interior habit that now I've exposed. And you can just start to see that formulate and kind of change and be really, really interesting. Now you can leave it too. You can leave it to just be full all the way down and just enjoy that trails. But you can expose the interior, do some tipping, eliminate those crossing branches, limit up, and just know when to prune. When we prune big branches, we prune in mid-February to mid-March. And then when we don't prune big branches in the middle of the summer, typically, we can leave it till the winter. Trust me, you can wait. But you can do other shaping types of pruning, light pruning. You can do that any time of the year. They're so much fun. You can change the shape and style. I hope all of that helped. I hope you understood kind of what I meant there. Limbing up is one of the easiest ones to expose that habit. I see it so many times, and it's personal preference. If you like that big bushy habit, grow it as a big bush. It's completely fine. But if you want to expose that, it's pretty simple. Start small, work your way up, work your way in. Don't take off something because you can't put it back on. So take your time, enjoy it, have fun. It's a really, really fun process to kind of get into pruning your Japanese maples, shaping them, doing different things. The one that I grew 18 years ago, that I've been growing for 18 years, I don't need to prune as much anymore, so I kind of miss it. I think I probably need to add to my collection and get a couple more. Excuse me. When I bought that big house, when I bought my new house, I had a big Japanese maple in the front yard. It was very low to the ground. It was almost hard to even get around it on the driveway and to the walkway to the front door. And so I took that tree and I limbed it up. It's got a gorgeous canopy. That was a lot of fun to work on. I love doing them. They're so easy actually. Once you get into it, you can kind of just see it and you kind of work slowly all the way up until the habit that you want. So I hope you all enjoy this. Let me take a minute here and answer any questions that you might have. So let me scroll back up to the top. I kind of got on a roll there, so I kind of stopped answering questions. We'll say hello to Betty Lou from Elizabeth City. Hello. Are you guys still selling the quart maples? I answered that. The smallest ones are going to be the 1 gallons, and they range anywhere from, I think, $69.99, I think, is the kind of, $69 to $79 to $89 for our 1 gallon size. Japanese maples are slow growing, so they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but they're highly collectible and very sought after. Which one will do good in a flower bed? So Dorothy, great question. Really all of them. It depends on the height that you want. We've got over 8,000 different varieties. We don't have them, all 8,000, but I've got a ton of different varieties. So just know the leaf color that you want and the size that you want and come in and check us out because it'd be very hard for me to tell you specifically which one that would be. But definitely, come in and talk to some of our garden experts. Know that you want a weeping or a broadleaf, a lace leaf or a broadleaf. How big do you want it to get, and what leaf color do you want? And we'll pick out one with you and get you the right one for your flower bed. Warren said, do you know if voles ever eat Japanese maple roots? Not sure if I need to add the hot pepper repellent. I forgot the name. So Repellex is the hot pepper systemic repellent that goes into the root system as well as the leaves. So yes, you can use that. Yes, voles can eat the root system of pretty much anything. Do they love Japanese maples? I won't say they love it, but they love anything newly planted. So if it was a recently planted Japanese maple, Warren, I would probably protect it by putting some of that either the vole block, the permatil around it, or using that Repellex systemic repellent. It's a great option for you. And if you've got it laying around, Warren, it's not going to hurt it, so you might as well use it. If you need to get more, we've got plenty of it inside. Let's see. Do they like to be root bound? Leave them in a pot. They don't love to be root bound because we're leaving them in a pot outside. They're okay being root bound. You can bonsai a Japanese maple. So bonsais are basically root bound little trees in a tiny little pot, and we're doing root prunings and different things to the root system. But if you're just growing in a container, if it's root bound, it's going to be fine. It's probably going to live perfectly fine. But you will have to water it a whole lot more. And it won't hold on to nutrients as much because there's no water holding capacity in there. There's no soil to hold the moisture. So the best thing I can tell you is probably upgrade the size of pot if it's pretty root bound. Doris said, I have several doing well wonderfully in South Texas. So yeah, I think they can take pretty warm temperatures. I guess I've never looked up the heat index to see how low south they can go. But I know most of them are hardy to like -20, -30 degrees. So you're definitely good there. Sandy said a few of mine have grown through the pot into the ground but are still alive and well. So Sandy, yes, that happens. The good news is if you want to get them in the ground, Sandy, or you want to get them into a bigger pot, you can actually prune that root system, that center root that's coming through the bottom of the pot. That is completely fine. Japanese maples have a pretty top-heavy root system, I would say, or a broad root system. They're not consistently grown off the taproot necessarily, like a larger oak tree or pine tree would have that very vital taproot. Japanese maples are more broad, a spreading root system. So that root has just worked its way down and said, ooh, there's a hole and there's more soil, and it's grown out of the hole into the soil underneath. It will anchor that pot in, so if you're okay with it for now, you can probably leave it, but you can actually go just kind of tilt that pot up, go in there, take a pair of pruners, lopping shears, or even that saw and just cut through it, and then you can go and plant it, and you'll be perfectly fine. Especially if you're going into the ground, use maybe some of this Biotone starter fertilizer, and that'll get it going, get that root system regenerated. Or you can upgrade it into a larger pot. Melissa said, I have Acer Palmatum Japanese Princess growing in coral rock with roots growing out of the bottom. Do I cut those and okay to bring in winter so rock doesn't crack from cold? So I'm assuming what you're probably talking about is lava rock. It could be a corally rock, but basically that rock has lots of pores in it that the root system will grow into. So yes, you're perfectly fine. Excuse me, I need to take a sip here. I got something in my throat. So basically that root system has grown into that rock, and you probably can't get it out without cracking it open or something. So the best thing to do is probably don't bring it in during the winter. I don't think you need to worry about the rock cracking. I think you probably need to worry about if it needs more space. So eventually what you might end up doing is just using that rock, putting it in a flower bed or something outside and letting it grow through the rock into the ground, or eventually maybe even planting that rock underneath the ground and having soil around it exposed, so it allows that to kind of break through. That root system will eventually get through that rock and start to grow into any soil that's around it. The other option, Melissa, is to cut it out of there. And the best possible thing is most of those growing pot rocks, basically have a hole cut into them where you would grow your maple. So you can take a sharp knife or even a small saw or something and basically cut those roots off. It's going to be a bit of a stressor to it. I'd probably use some Super Thrive to take the stress off. I'd probably use some Biotone Starter to get those roots regenerated, get into some nice fresh soil, and I think you'll be fine if you're trying to save your rock. If not, you might break it up, or you might even just plant it with some soil up around it and you've got that rock kind of exposed. It'd be kind of cool. Let's see. Beverly said, I had a Rhode Island red suffer a little frostbite. Should I trim back all of the frost damage, or will it revive? It'll revive on its own. You don't have to, but I definitely probably would. It probably would love to be getting a little bit of a tipping. So if you've got new leaves that came out on your Japanese maple this year, and then all of a sudden we got that late frost, and I know the Rhode Island red, it's a gorgeous tree. Then taking a little bit of a tipping on it would probably help regenerate new growth real fast. So I would say do it, but if it's big and you got a lot of tips, and you could just let it go. It'll kind of knock it off itself and it'll regenerate. All right, I think that's it. I think I got everybody's questions. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I hope you all learned a lot. This is one of my favorite topics. I love Japanese maples. There's so many to choose from. And there's so much versatility and different places that you can use them. And I love to prune them. And they're pretty easy to maintain. So this was the 101 kind of information to get you to kind of understand how to grow them, how to choose them, how to use them around your yard. So I hope you all enjoyed this. And we'll see you next time. And have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the spring weather. Come and see us here at McDonald Garden Center.